Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Sake Drinker and Friends. We're downtown in the beautiful Napa Valley at Momo-san Bar at Morimoto, Napa. We have a couple guests, Jonathan and Laura, joined us today for the show. We have, of course, Susan Quinn, who's making it all happen behind the scenes. Thanks, Susan. And we have a very exciting guest today. We have Justin Dunne, who's here in town for a few days, visiting. He's our GM for the Bangkok property about to open soon. And we'll be there for a while. If you're watching from Bangkok, please come by and visit us at the restaurant. We'll be there for a while, in about a few weeks, huh?
Indeed, we're looking to open hopefully on May the 22nd. And some of the team from Morimoto Bangkok are here in Napa for a couple days, training and learning everything about Chef Morimoto's cuisine and obviously all sorts of drinks, beverages, and cuisine.
Awesome. Well, Justin, funny enough, small world, he was born in Oregon and then was raised in Sacramento, not too far from here. So he's familiar with the area, so we're happy to have him. And then you traveled the world a bit, right?
I did, and this has really been especially thrilling for me because it's a little bit like coming home. It's the first time in 11 years that I've actually been surrounded by so many competent, professional Americans. So it's been thrilling for me, and I really look forward to kicking things off in Bangkok.
Absolutely. How long you been there?
11 years.
Wow, in Bangkok.
In Bangkok.
Wow.
And we did travel around a little bit beforehand, but most of the time has been in Bangkok.
In Bangkok. That's awesome. Well, let's get to it and let's start drinking some sake. That's what the name says. So we'll start with one of the, as you know by now, throughout a year and a half of shows, one of my all-time favorites, and repeats, the Ishishima. This sake is really dear to my heart. They've been making sake since 1790 in Niigata. This is a style that's a tokubetsu onjoso. Tokubetsu means special. Take note, whoever's learning about sake today. Tokubetsu means special. In some cases, it's a loose term. It could be like a reserve in a bottle of wine per se. And let's say sometimes you can call it tokubetsu if the Dalai Lama walked by your property, or a blessed, or whatever it means. In this case, they're very specific, and the tokubetsu means they polish the grain of rice a little more. As we all know, by polishing the rice 30% or more makes it a premium style sake. It puts it in the honjoso or junmai category. About 40% makes it a ginjo or junmai ginjo, and then 50 or more makes it a dai ginjo. So that's your basic rules of sake. This one, obviously, about 40%. That's what makes it tokubetsu. It's at a ginjo level. Another thing they do, and I'll pass this one around to the audience as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. This one from Niigata, the water in the area gives it a very soft, clean texture. Think about snow melt in the water. Another factor that's very drastic in this style of sake, it's honjoso. So every time you see the word honjoso to it, means they added alcohol to it. Some sort of distilled alcohol. It could be grain alcohol for the most part. It could be the own sake distilled and reintroduced into the actual sake. It makes a drier style, aromatic, very fun. Let's taste it and then see what we think. This is a natural occurring yeast, and the yeast for sake, for everybody watching, gives a lot of the aromas. This is definitely the notes of almost like baby powder and certain fruits like gala apple and flowery aromas in there. Very, very delicious. As you can see, there is some viscosity. Sake generally has about 14 to 18% alcohol. Even if it's a honjoso, if they added the brewer's alcohol, they water it down. So unless you see the words genshu, which means undiluted, you can assume that's within that category. So like a California Zinfandel or an Abe Schooner wine, for that matter, at that level, as we were tasting earlier. So cheers, guys. Kampai, thanks for being on the show.
Cheers indeed.
Cheers. Fun, chalky. I always find new things in this sake. I mean, a little cocoa even in the background, but the lean quality to it, the weight of a Northern Italian white wine in a way, where it just kind of flows through, and exciting. So let's talk about in Bangkok. Do you see much sake around there?
In some of the Japanese restaurants, we do, but it's still a predominantly dark spirit market. A lot of beer. Wine has come onto the market quite strong, and then sake sits there sort of discreetly behind the other options. So it's still a fairly young, fresh market.
Which is exciting. It's the most exciting thing to go into a market where you can go and teach something and make it exciting. I mean, the U.S., as we all know, has come a long way in the last 10 years even, where it was at a very low level, and now it's picking up a lot of steam. You see it at more restaurants. You even see it at non-Japanese restaurants these days. I mean, in Napa, there's a handful of places, La Toque, the French Laundry. I have a friend that has a sandwich shop down the street, Melted, where they do this fun sandwiches with waffles and stuff, and they carry 2 sakes, and they do really well with them. I mean, aside from beer and wine and all those things. So it's an exciting thing, and today we have a little treat. I don't want to tell you the end of the movie, but there's a little dish that I wanted to pair today with a sake that's coming up, and seeing how drastic the change is with something you wouldn't expect it normally. Okay. But yeah, let's enjoy this baby, and then we'll move on to another one. Aside from everything that we spoke about this sake, it's a beautiful packaging. It always catches my eye, and everybody that sees it. Pretty fun. You might be wondering about the size, and we talked about it before. So this is a 1.8 size of sake. It's called a toben, and traditionally sake sizes, you can find a little bottle, which would be this one, for instance, a 300 ml. There's also a 720, which would be more like this. And then there's the 1.8s. So it's a gradual transition. As we know how everything started measure-wise in Japan, it all started with a masu. So a masu box is used to be a form of measurement. It still is at some point. It's 180 mLs. Okay. So everything stems from there, the gradual progression to a 1.8. So back in the days, a few hundred years ago, if I was a worker, I'd go to work with my little box, get to work. At the end of the day, they paid me in rice. So they'd fill it up with rice. I go home, pour it down in a little container for my wife to wash it and cook it. In the meantime, I'm gonna go to the bar with my box, get to the little local water hole, fill it up with sake, have a few drinks. By the time, the rice might be ready. You go back home, have a great dinner, and then repeat every day. So it's a fun little story I love to tell, and I mean I love to hear too. And it all stems from one little box of rice. So let's taste the next sake. Now that we've talked about those things, and I don't know, there might be things that you want to ask or
I'm learning a tremendous amount just here in this session alone. That was quite a fascinating story right there. I'd not ever heard that story before, and obviously your level of knowledge is...
It just means I drink a lot of sake. That's all it is.
Okay, I mean,
don't be fooled.
Anybody watching home, I'm sure, in just these brief couple of moments has gone, wow, there's clearly a whole world of sake out there that is a lot of people are really just touching upon.
I mean, and it happens to all of us at some point. When I started drinking sake, it was a mom and pop's place where you walk in and you relate, because there's places like this in all over the world. You walk in and I'll say I take hot sake or a cold sake, and that's all there is. There's no list. I think we spoke about this a couple days ago. There's no actual breadth in the list. There's nothing. It's just like, I want sake. It's like going to a Mexican restaurant and saying, I want tequila, and that's it. You don't know what you're gonna get. Is it a blanco? Is it a reposado? Is it what? So in a way, it's in its infancy, but that's how most people started drinking sake. And I always thought, it's the same thing. Every sake is the same thing. It's a thing that you go and it's a comfort thing. Whether it's a rainy day and you want to drink some hot sake with your sushi, there it is. But then at some point we started tasting, when we opened the restaurant, we had a really formal training and started tasting different sakes and seeing all the layers and styles there is, and it's fascinating. Not only the stories, but prefectural wise, if you have a sake from the north as opposed to the south, there's different qualities to it. And just to recap, I mean, sake is made of 4 ingredients. There's water, which has a lot to do in terms of minerality. Northern style, as we saw with the Ishishima, it's very clean, snow melt. And then if you find certain pockets in the center of Japan and the south, there's mineral deposits. So all this minerality in the water gives it some depth and weight in the palate. And then from there you go into the rice, which can be polished, and there's about 300 strains of rice that can be used for sake. There's a few that are the most popular. I'd say like 3 or 4 come to mind. Omachi, which is a very high acid. When you see that one in the bottle, you can assume you'll have that raise the acidity in a way. There's Yamada Nishiki, there's Goha Manyaku, Koshi Ikari. Those are the father rices per se. And then you can go in depth. Some people actually use table rice, which is a very different strain because it's a shorter stalk. You don't have as much starch around. So the way the rice is treated for the sake production, you get polished away. So if you think about a grain of rice, a grain of brown rice per se, to make sake, you polish away all this outer shell, like 30% to make it a premium, as we said, and then you can go in depth all the way to the center where you get to the shimpaku, or the heart of the rice, and makes a very delicate, very pure style of sake, and usually so feminine and layered that it's like if you have a little spice, it'll just be overpowered. But that's the other thing. The other thing is yeast, which, as we talk about, sometimes is natural occurring, which it's really lucky for a brewery to do that, or some wineries that might do that. And then the other kinds is number 7, number 9, number 2 that you see more often. There is a yeast bank in Japan where you actually just go buy your yeast you want. If you're doing a certain sake and you want certain aromas in it, it's pretty interesting. But I feel like we're talking a lot and the audience is thirsty. So the fourth element in the sake production is the koji. And koji, it's a mold per se. And what it does, it's mold that's found on multiple things in Japan. It's used to make soy sauce, to make miso, all those things. So what the koji does in the terms of sake speaking, it grabs the starches out of the rice and converts them into sugars to be able to, for the yeast, to convert them into alcohol. So it's a multiple parallel process, and it takes like one guy pulling another guy out, and then the other one pulls them out, and then bam, then you have a party and you have alcohol. So those are the 4 main elements. The 5th one, just like the Beatles had a 5th guy every once in a while, would be the alcohol, just like the honjoso that we talked about, and makes it a different style. And I hate to hear myself talk a lot, but or bore you guys, but I'll tell you a quick story on the honjoso, on the alcohol. So it had been experimented throughout the years, centuries and whatnot. But during the Second World War, the country of Japan was at war, and they came to a point where the government said, well, right now we're in a crisis. We need the rice to eat. We need to feed the troops and the families and whatnot. So he came to the breweries, and they said, okay, we know you want to get the party going and keep drinking and producing your beverage, sake, which is a national beverage. However, we need to find a way to increase the yields and just to cut down on the consumption of the rice so we can eat. So what they came with is creating a law that created that all the sake had to be honjoso. So at that point, Second World War, thinking 1942 roughly, they said everything has to be alcohol added to increase the yields, and everybody's happy. You still make a beverage, right? So by some point after the Second World War, everything leveled off. There was enough rice to eat. So what they said is, it's up to you now. So a lot of breweries kept that style. A lot of breweries do multiple styles, and so on and so forth. But this next sake, this one is called Rihaku, the Wandering Poet. And this one is a Junmai Ginjo. So now we have slightly higher polishing level than the Ishishima, but not by much, because as we said, it's a special style. This one is not brewer's alcohol added. So you'll see when you taste it and smell it, there's certain depth into it. First of all, with the aromas. This is a southern style sake, and the texture in the palate is just incredible. It's just, there's weight, there's an extra coat, a little oily quality. I don't know how you describe it. I mean, everybody has different ways.
It is pretty slick. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely slippery. Less of the powder, or the sort of the chalky, the mineral element that we had with the first sake, but equally is refreshing and light. Quite nice.
Definitely. Yeah. Is there something you guys would say?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more weight.
More weight?
Maybe like Chardonnay.
Totally.
It's the apple, that crisp apple, that little bit of roundness to it.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody could hear out there in New Zealand or wherever you're watching us, but what Laura was saying is that it's a little more resemblance to of a Chardonnay, a little green apple, richer style in a way, and totally it's a whole night and day in styles, and that's to prove the point that there's a lot of terroir, if you will, or prefecture-driven styles. The story about the Rihaku is that he was a poet. He used to write poems. And the cool thing about sake that helped him is that every time he had a bottle of wine, a bottle of sake in this case, whether it's not specified if it was a 1.8 or a 720 or a small one, every time he pounded a whole bottle by himself, he wrote 1,000 poems. So it was like his magic potion. And that's why the name for the Wandering Poet.
Okay.
Shimane Prefecture, this is one of the very avant-garde producers where he's one of the only guys that produces all his own rice. And in Japan, for the breweries, you usually source the rice. If you're in certain prefecture or other, you say, hey, send me the Koshi Ikari from Niigata or from Fukui or whatever it's from. But this guy started doing all his own fields, and he started doing all organic styles. And he's pushing the envelope in terms of doing sparkling sake, which is something not very common, or in some cases frowned upon, and infusing and whatnot. But in this case, very traditional, very squared, Junmai Ginjo style. But I mean, you can see that the viscosity is a little even bigger than the Ishishima and fun and richer. Yes, Jonathan.
Which sakes would you serve first? Are you serving them based on the rice milling, or are you serving them first based on alcohol?
Well, it's a great question. In which progression you serve the sakes, as if it was with wine? Well, the difference here with wine and sake is that you don't have an aggressive tannic structure, or bitterness, or sweetness in some cases, but it's more of a more in the same parallel in that style. And there is some, as we saw, the richness in the palate. So, it being that said, the only thing I'd watch, and I always watch with the pairings and progressions that we do, is a daiginjo style is always like the little delicate girl. And you can't put a big dish in terms of like meaty style or spicy, because it'll just overpower it. It's like the wolf and the little Red Riding Hood. It's just gonna eat it away, right? So in that sense, you can put a bigger style, a Junmai, a Honjoso, a Junmai Ginjo even, and those will attack those bigger dishes. So instead of wine, this is hard to wrap around. It took us a while, but in sake, the lower grades per se, but still premium, but it's, well, let's recap. The Japanese culture, let's look at it as a whole. It's very noble in a way where you're never gonna get charged for something unless there's a craft or something really special involved in there. So Junmais and Honjosos are always gonna be more inexpensive or more value driven than daiginjos, just because the craft that goes into it, right? So to polish a grain of rice from 30 or from 0 to let's say 30% or 60% to a daiginjo, it might take 3 days to do the polishing. You're taking all the time and decreasing your yields. So you make a more delicate style, takes more time, is more expensive. You'll find daiginjos that are $1,000 in some cases, some that are $300, but the medium price will range above $100, right? For daiginjo. The other ones are more expensive. You can find some for $30, $50, and richer style. So, recapping on a progression, if you start with lighter dishes in a dinner, you would start with daiginjos, which is the most expensive, which you wouldn't do with wine, right? You would start with theoretically, you could start with white wines and then move into a rich cab per se, or a zin, or a syrah that demands a little more money, right? So, in that sense, going back, I don't know if I really have answered your question. I doubt it. You start with lighter styles, which are higher polishing, where they're not going to fight with the dish. And when you get to the main courses, you go to the big boys, to the warriors, the daiginjos, the honjosos, the little broad style. Generally, when we do a flight and we come and present it, we always say there's no rules. Just try to avoid those. There's another style of sake that's called koshu, which is aged sake, and that one definitely commands a little richness and muscle to it, and just darker tones and oxidative notes. So that one you can throw with dessert or main courses, and it's gonna pair well.
Do you find, let's talk about Japan a little bit. Obviously, Japan now is drinking and creating a lot more craft beers.
Yes.
They're also drinking a lot more wine. And the Japanese whiskeys are obviously as popular
On the
as
rise,
ever. Are the Japanese then creating or producing less sake or drinking less sake?
You know, production-wise has decreased in the last 50 years. As far as how many breweries are out there, it has decreased, but they're maintained. The ones that are still going, they're maintaining their style. Now, thankfully for the U.S. and markets similar, we're the biggest consumers. Japan is going through something similar to what France or Italy are going with, where it's sad but true, where the younger generations, like our ages, are drinking other things. Like I was talking to Chef Arnaud, who's going to be our chef for Bangkok. He's from France. He's lived all over the world, but he's French, and he was telling me the other day on a car ride to an event. He says it's funny because I don't drink wine. He said no, that's for my parents and older people. I drink beer sometimes, and I drink spirits, and that's what's happening. The younger generations are staying away from that, so you're decreasing your consumption. I mean, there is amazing thought and hope that the next generation will pick it up and be like, oh, it's cool. Something that's happened in Mexico with like mezcal.
Right.
Now all the people our age are starting to drink mezcal, where it was starting to be cool again. So that's what they're hoping for.
So do you find then that perhaps some of the Japanese sake breweries are almost now sort of catering to a more foreign audience, a more foreign palate?
There is, and don't get me wrong, there's still a good chunk of the Japanese population reporting their own styles.
Sure.
Sometimes it's geeky, sometimes it's just going like, oh, let's just go visit the brewery just for fun, right? It's cute and it's right there, we're playing tourists for the day. But, yeah, I mean, in a sense, they're driving their sales and staying afloat because of our markets like us, where they're on the rise. I mean, as opposed to them, for us here, as we said, all generations are starting to drink sake. I see all age ranges when at the restaurants. I was just in Orlando doing a social media class at the restaurant, and people from all ages. There was some 70-year-old people that were so excited about sake. Scott? And it's a whole different force. Well, we don't want a thirsty audience member here. But on that note, with Scott Barber joining us, we'll wrap it up. And that went super fast. I want to say thank you all for coming. Justin, it was a treat having you. We'll definitely continue the conversation.
Indeed.
So much fun.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you so much. And until next time, come by and we'll see you soon. Cheers. Thank you.